how do you see right now the conflict in Ukraine? We've learned that Germany is sending secretly weapons to Ukraine, and nobody knows why they're trying to do this secretly and not just putting out what they're doing right now. And we've learned that EU has transferred a new tranche of 4.2 billion euros to Ukraine. And on the other hand, we are witnessing that Orban is getting more isolated, who's against the war in Ukraine, more isolated in the European Union. How do you find the current situation of the conflict?
Russia's winning. Who cares what Germany does? Who cares what the European Union does? Who cares what the Americans do in terms of providing? You can't fix broken. Ukraine is broken, can't be fixed. Money doesn't make manpower sprout out of nowhere. Ukraine needs manpower. They don't have it. They're taking massive casualties at the front lines. They can't replace those casualties. The money that's being sent isn't enough to replace the material being destroyed by Russia on the battlefield. Military math is such that Ukraine is depleting human and physical resources at a rate far greater than they can be replenished. Why is Germany doing something in secret? Ask the Germans why they're doing it in secret. Maybe because the public, maybe because the parliament has said we don't approve of certain budgetary requests. We don't approve of your $4 billion or $6 billion increase. We only give you $1.2 billion. Maybe because the German military is fundamentally broken. Maybe that they're stealing from a fundamentally broken system to get this aid to Ukraine because Germany wants to appear to be keeping up to its obligations that it's made to the United States and to NATO, but it can't be honest with the German people. Remember, Baerbock has said, I don't care what the German people say. I will do what I feel is right for Ukraine. That's how Germany operates. It's not a democracy. It's literally a dictatorship. And they're playing stupid games. But it's not game changing. 4 billion euro. I sneeze and it's gone. That's just the reality of this war is too expensive. One of the things that came out of the NATO summit was that a recognition that European defense industry and American defense industry, as it's currently configured, cannot meet the demands of the European conflict. Whereas Russian defense industry, backed by the resources of Iran and North Korea, is more than able to continue to meet the demands. Russian manpower is not depleted. I mean, you could read all the headlines you want to, but the fact is they're bringing in 30, 40,000 minimum in a month. That's the reality. Let's say that Russia's taken out 2,500 Ukrainians a day, roughly a brigade. And if Putin had talked about a 5-to-1 ratio, so 5 goes into 25 5 times, 500. So 500 Russians are being taken out a day in this fighting. I just want to point out that that's a casualty rate greater than what America suffered in Vietnam, greater than what America suffered during World War II. This is, so anybody who thinks there's not heavy fighting going on, you don't know what you're talking about. There's extraordinarily heavy fighting going on. It's very, very bloody. But 500 a day, let's call it average day is 3, 30 days. So 30 times 5. So, we're basically talking about 1,500. No, I'm sorry, my math is off by that. But if Russia's bringing 30 to 40,000 and you got 500 a day, 15,000 Russian casualties a month. I think that military math adds up there. So Russia's still, you subtract 15, but you add 40. God, Russia's still increasing. Ukraine, on the other hand, 25 is being subtracted. They're adding how many a day? 200, 300. So every day you have a deficit of more than 2,000 men in an already depleted force. You can't paper that over with euros. I mean, Germany can fly in all the euros it wants, start licking them, painting them up and all that stuff, covering tanks, covering whatever. It's paper. Ukraine needs flesh and blood. They don't have it. Ukraine needs steel. They don't have it. Ukraine needs high explosive. They don't have it. what they do have is being used to good effect. They're killing a lot of Russians, but they're losing so much more, and it's unsustainable. And that's the reality of Ukraine.
We've learned that Arestovich, former advisor of Zelensky, is talking about that Ukraine, before going after some sort of negotiations, they're going to have another counteroffensive. Do you think that with the current situation, they're talking about F-16s being in Ukraine, is that possible for the current Ukrainian army to go on offensive?
In July 1944, the Germans in France suffered a huge defeat. The Falaise Gap, it was called. Basically, they lost, tens of thousands of dead, hundreds of thousands of wounded and prisoners. Massive gap torn, and they retreated in great disarray towards the border. Meanwhile, in the east, Russia's Soviet Union's carrying out Operation Bagration, the destruction of Army Group Center, and again, just hundreds of thousands of Germans wiped off the battlefield. Strategic reserves depleted, armor depleted, ammunition depleted. December 1944, Germany launched the Ardennes Offensive, Battle of the Bulge. You see what I'm getting at here? Of course, it's possible for Ukraine to launch a counteroffensive if you allocate enough resources and put them in a specific geographic position and tell them to advance. You've just launched a counteroffensive. What happened to the Germans in the Battle of Bulge? Their forces were totally annihilated. They lost their strategic reserves. As a result, it hastened the collapse of the fighting on the Western Front. I talked about Operation Bagration, but as the Russians pushed forward throughout the summer and fall of 1945, the Germans launched a counteroffensive near Lake Balaton. Again, got forces, advanced, had some progress before they were stopped, and they died. Ukraine can launch a counteroffensive. They're still a very large army. They still have a lot of equipment. Even though they're depleted, the depletion leads to a thinning of the ranks, but it doesn't mean that the army goes away. The German army didn't go away. People know that, when after Berlin surrendered, there was, Steiner's, I forget, the Ninth Army or some First Army, whatever, coming out of Czechoslovakia, 1.2 million men. The German army just didn't disappear. They were there. There's a huge army there fighting. Ukrainian army isn't just going to disappear. It's there. It's just the ability for cohesive continuance of, coordinated resistance is going to go away because there will be holes broken in there. But the Germans fought till the very end. They didn't just disappear. And the way the Germans fought, because they were professional, is when attacked, you counterattack at the local level. And the Ukrainians are professional. You don't kill 500 Russians a day if you're not professional. They're damn good soldiers. Second best soldiers in Europe after the Russians. Some cases, they might be the best soldiers in Europe because they're resisting a very effective military with forces that are insufficient to the task. So individually, the Ukrainians may have in certain circumstances, the best soldiers in Europe, the bravest soldiers in Europe. But they're going to die because the Russians are damn good and they got more of them, and they will prevail. But the notion that the Ukrainians can't launch a counterattack, that's absurd. Professional military forces always counterattack, especially when you're being attacked. Marine Corps is an offensive-oriented organization. The first thing we learn after assaulting through an objective and taking it is to prepare for the counterattack. Because if you're pushed off your objective, the most vulnerable the people that pushed you off are ever going to be is in that immediate moment. Because as they attack, their forces get separated. They've suffered casualties. There will be, situational ammunition depletion. Command and control will have broken up, and there's confusion. So while you don't give them time to bring their act together, you immediately regroup and go straight back up the hill and counterattack to push them back off the hill. That's what professionals do. And so the Ukrainians are going to counterattack up until the last possible moment. The last professional Ukrainian soldier will probably die counterattacking his Russian opponent. because he will have been pushed off an objective, and he knows that unless he counterattacks, he'll never get that objective back. That's just the way war is, man. So of course Ukraine's going to counterattack, and they'll use whatever weapons are necessary, but their weapons aren't good enough. There's not enough of them. We should stop talking about the F-16, really. I mean, it's like, it's the equivalent of elder abuse, you know? If you got, geriatric with Alzheimer's disease, you take care of them. The F-16 is a geriatric with Alzheimer's disease. The worst thing they could do is put it into combat because it's going to die. It has no chance. They don't have good pilots. They don't have airfields. They can't sustain it. It's a dream. It's a dream. That's all it is. So, the idea that the F-16 is going to change it, it's actually making it worse, because here's the thing. The F-16 implies certain capabilities because there's like an aura attached to it, the F-16. Ooh, we now can carry out effective, ground support, air support of the ground operation, close air support. We can bring in, we got the F-16, it can do that. You're going to envision capabilities that don't exist, and you're going to try to implement operations on the ground that can't be implemented because you don't have the capability to do it. And then you expose yourself for even greater defeat. So giving the Ukrainians F-16s will actually accelerate the process of their defeat. It's a horrible weapon system, especially when applied in this manner. They don't have bases where they can operate from. The planes have zero survivability and zero sustainability. They will start taking losses once they chew through the pilots. There will be nobody to fly these planes. It's just a non-factor.
When you look at the NATO summit and their policy right now, do you think we can surely say that they're not going to send troops to Ukraine?
100%. NATO will not send troops to Ukraine. There's no troops to send. That's one of the things that came out. Where are they going to come from? I mean, if theoretically France could send 2,000 guys, they'll all die. Poland could send a couple thousand, they'll all die. Germany can't, because they're fat people who eat schnitzel, drink beer, and they can't get out of their barracks. So we don't have to have Germans going to Ukraine. America's not going to send troops. Nobody can, because it's unsustainable. We can't suffer a brigade's loss when we have 3 brigades in our brigades are a little bit bigger, so we'll call it 6 equivalent brigades. That means that we could survive 6 days on the battlefield against the Russians. And unless we have more brigades coming in, which we don't have, it's over. NATO talks about 500,000 troops rapid. It's a joke. They don't have them. Rapid response from where? Sustainability with what? Again, logistics is what you have to talk about. Quit talking to me about manpower and all this stuff, showing those numbers. Back in the 1980s, the United States had the finest military in the world. We really did. We trained hard. We were well equipped, well led. But we still had to operate within the realm of reality. We had 250,000 troops in Germany. We were prepared to fly in another 300,000 within 10 days so that we could put in more than 500,000 American ground combat forces to fight as part of a unified NATO structure to hold back a Soviet attack. But let's not talk about the number of troops or even the tanks, tens of thousands of tanks. Let's talk about fuel. If you got tens of thousands of tanks, they chug diesel. You have other mechanized support chugs gasoline. Where's that come from? You just can't take your tank to a gas station and say, hey, fill me up. You got to have the fuel there. And it's got to be part of a plan that's been made to say we need to have enough fuel to sustain this amount of equipment over this period of time, which means you need massive fuel depots that are dedicated just for that responsibility. Ammunition. You got 500,000 guys getting ready to go into combat, intense combat, where you're going to be firing off rounds like you've never fired them off before. Where's that ammo coming from? Got to have massive ammunition dumps. Now, to have the fuel and the ammunition dumps means that you have to have defense industry that is producing this stuff. You have to have, the ability within your refinery capability to produce this excess capacity that's being stored there. But when the Cold War ended, we stopped dealing with excess, because you know what's the problem with excess capacity is? It ain't very economically efficient. In fact, it's the most inefficient thing economically you can think of, to have more than you need and just have it sitting there doing nothing. And so we were looking for the peace dividend. So we got away with this. We reduced our forces. We said there's not going to be a large-scale conflict in Europe anymore. So we only need enough ammunition and fuel set aside for very short duration conflicts involving very limited number of troops. And we've never adjusted to that. We've put in some pre-positioned equipment, brigades worth, not divisions worth, not a corps worth, brigades worth. But do they have the fuel? Do they have the ammunition? Likewise, put forward for that. And the answer is no. They definitely don't have the ammunition. And the fuel is problematic because the system's not designed anymore for this excess capacity, the excess storage. So NATO can't do what NATO says it needs to do to respond to the so-called threat posed by Russia.
When you look at the behavior of Germany, they have reduced from 8 billion to 4 billion right now helping Ukraine. And you talk about that NATO is not willing to send troops to Ukraine to help Ukraine. At the same time, we know that what's the situation of the Ukrainian army. How do you see the end game in the eyes of NATO right now? Do they have any sort of end game in Ukraine?
You know, this is like a gambler who has gone to Vegas and walks in. He's dressed up nicely. He's got his chips and he's got his good-looking blonde hair, and he's got the key to his hotel room here. He's put on his cologne and got the gold chain, and he's looking really hot. He gets to the table, starts rolling the dice, and he's losing. Chips are going away. And okay, but he reaches his credit card, he maxes out, gets more. Blonde's still there. He's living the style. But now he's in debt. He's lost his stake. He's in debt. His credit cards are exhausted. But he still needs the blonde there. He's trying to impress her. So he's there. But at some point in time, he goes to the bathroom and pawns his gold necklace because he still needs to be rolling the chips and all that kind of stuff. And then he sells his car out there. So that's tough because he promised her a ride in the car. And then he gets rid of his hotel room because he can't afford it. But he has the blonde. He has to keep the blonde there and keep going, keep the premise up until eventually there ain't nothing left and the blonde leaves. And he's stuck with no car, no hotel, no blonde, no nothing. That's NATO. This summit was a joke. This summit was about impressing the blonde. That's all it was about. I don't mean to be insulting redheads or brunettes out there. It was about impressing. You see what I'm trying to do. I have to be careful sometimes. I use 1980s, 1990s analogies that are politically unacceptable today. But the point is, NATO's trying to impress itself, literally itself. It's trying to impress itself. That's the only audience it has. It long ago, Russia just stopped caring. Russia doesn't care about NATO right now. How do we know? When was the last time Vladimir Putin led off a major announcement or press conference talking about the war in Ukraine? At the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum at the plenary session, he started off with a long talk about the Russian economy, about BRICS, about that. That's what Russia's talking about. That's the direction Russia's heading. The same thing in the press conferences. Well, everybody else in the West is talking Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. Putin starts off talking about the economy, talking about how to improve relations, geopolitical transitions. And then he got to the war. The war to them is an afterthought. It's there, but they're winning. They've got it under control. There's no panic. NATO's panicking, literally panicking, because they got to impress what I was calling the blonde, but we'll just call it the object that it wants to impress. But the point is, NATO is a fundamentally broken institution. What's going to happen? I don't know what happens when you're confronted with absolute failure, absolute collapse. I don't think NATO survives the decade. I really don't. It's a fundamentally broken institution. It can't afford what it's trying to do. Germany, who's secretly sneaking stuff off to Europe, as you said, they had to cut the amount of money they're sending to Ukraine. Germany's supposed to be the lead agency, the lead nation in NATO about redefining NATO to fight, to hold off the Russian threat. Olaf Scholz felt so strongly about it that he allocated 100 billion euro, I think last year, to jumpstart this transition of the German military. But as I've said before, if you don't maintain your house collapses. NATO is a house that hasn't been maintained. When your house collapses, the money that you think would be sufficient to bring it up to standard isn't enough. The 100 billion that Scholz put out isn't enough to fix the decades-long rot that has infected the German military. And so Boris Pistorius went to the German parliament and said, I need money. I need to increase my defense budget by 6 billion euro a year so we can, keep growing in the direction we went. He got 1.2 billion. That ain't even inflation. So the German military is shrinking. The British, same way, shrinking. The French, shrinking. The only army that's growing is the Poles, and that's the problem. Because the Poles are creating a military that, again, in and of itself can't confront the Russians, but the Poles believe that they've got NATO backing. So the Poles are leaning forward, creating something that can only work if they're backed by NATO, but NATO is shrinking. NATO is a fundamentally broken institution. Hungary is a NATO member. Viktor Orban is a NATO leader, and they're isolating them. Anybody who thinks that there's NATO unity, understand right there that there is no unity. But it's worse than that. Turkey, a major member of NATO, has said that they're going to go to BRICS. How does that happen? Because, NATO and the G7 are sort of linked. They're one and the same. It's the same people. And if you're NATO and the EU is the same thing in terms of the European economic, political, military relationship. The EU has rejected Turkey. So Turkey now is talking about jumping over to BRICS, which is, of course, the geopolitical counterweight to the G7, to the EU. How does that work if you're NATO and to have a major element component, the southern flank, run off? What happens when France gets a government in that maybe says we don't want to be part of the military council anymore, that we want to pull France out of the military council? You're stuck with Finland. The good old Finns, the loyal Finns. They're not loyal. I just want to remind everybody the Finns were sworn to maintain neutrality and perpetuity, and they broke that. They jumped over to NATO thinking they're protected, but now they're reacting to the fact that NATO can't protect them, that they're by themselves. Look at a map, Finland. You got a big border with Russia. NATO used to say, and look, now we've extended NATO's contact with Russia. Yay, aren't we great? The Finns are going, yay, wait a minute. But we need help. There's a big border, a lot of Russians over there. We need help. And NATO went, don't worry, we got your back. Could we exercise it? Sure. They did a big exercise. And NATO went, we're going to send 600 troops. The Finns are going, but we need 600,000. You can get 600 right now. We're just going to test it. Okay, it's just a test, right? Yeah. So we're going to land them in the Norwegian port. Okay, that makes sense. Norway, they're there. Yeah. We're going to bring them over the Norwegian mountain. Okay. But the road's not very good. No, it's not, is it? There's tunnels that could be bombed. Yeah. But if they bomb the tunnels, then the troops can't come from the port to don't worry about it, Finland. We got this. We're going to build infrastructure. They bring them down through Sweden, and the Finns are going, but that's a long road with a lot of bridges. What if the Russians bomb those bridges and there's no plan B? Don't worry, we're going to improve that infrastructure. Oh, okay. And we're going to bring them up and then bring them up over to Finland. And Finland's going, we got 11 bases. And they go, thanks. But you're going to have to build those bases for us. You have to pay for that. But I thought we were part of NATO. I thought NATO was going to help us. No, you got to build the bases. Oh, that's expensive. Yeah. But our economy's not doing so good. See, we got a problem. We need wood. Does NATO have wood? We need NATO wood more than we need NATO soldiers right now because we boycotted the Russian wood, and we're not getting Russian wood anymore. And our economy needs wood. Can NATO provide us with wood? No. We provide you with soldiers, but you just told me you can't. Yeah, I know, but we still need you to build your base. See, Finland just made a huge mistake. It sucks to be Finland right now. It sucks to be Sweden right now. It sucks to be in NATO right now. NATO is a fundamentally broken institution. So is the European Union. And so I just see the collapse of Europe as it's currently configured, and NATO would be a big part of that collapse.
Do you think, if we were to mention the main outcome of this NATO summit, that would be the shifting of the focus from Russia to China? Because right
No,
now, no.
I don't agree. Again, that's just fantasy driven. Go finish your question. I apologize. Finish your question, and I'll answer.
Okay, because right now Bloomberg reported that Starmer in the UK, they're talking about China poses deadly threat to the United Kingdom. And we saw that they were inviting Australia, New Zealand, and Japan and South Korea in order to send a message to China. But
Ooh,
what would that mean for
nothing.
the
Nothing.
conflict?
It means nothing. It means nothing. You think China loses any sleep over Australia? All China cares about in Australia is its iron ore and its lithium, maybe some other minerals. It wants economic relations with Australia. You think Australian military, the Chinese, loses any sleep over the Australian military? No, not at all. They used to have Collins-class submarines, but they're getting rid of those. We don't know what's going to replace them, but the Australians don't have enough sailors to do it anyway, so it doesn't matter. New Zealand, I mean, the vaunted New Zealand Navy, I mean, all, 16 ships, threatens China. The New Zealand Army threatens China. The New Zealand Air Force threatens China. No. South Korea, that's a different issue. But South Korea doesn't threaten China. South Korea is scared of China. And the same thing with Japan. Japan doesn't threaten China. Japan's worried about China. So now NATO says, we want to create this relationship with you. They go, okay, what's that mean? Well, South Korea, what it means is you have to produce military equipment and ship it to Ukraine. South Korea's like, okay, but what do we get out of it? Oh, we're going to send a German ship. A German ship. Yeah, a German ship. And what's it going to do? It's going to train with you guys. But how does that help us? It's a German ship. It's NATO. Yeah, but if we go to war against China, that ship's going to be sunk. And where are the rest of the German Navy? Oh, no, you're not getting the German Navy. You're getting a German ship. It's a token presence. You might get a French maritime surveillance aircraft. But France is all the way over there. France can't even send troops to Ukraine, which is close to it. And now you're telling me that France is going to help us? No, it is a joke. It's purely political posturing. It means nothing. I just told you NATO can't meet the requirements of defending Europe. And now NATO is going to expand into the Pacific somehow, flex muscles that simply don't exist, create a relationship, what they call the Indo-Pacific Four, that is on paper only. No, this is stupidity in the extreme. It's an act of desperation on the part of NATO to be seen as relevant, but they can't back it up. There's nothing to back it up with. It's a one-way street. They want South Korean weapons. They want Japanese weapons. That's it. They're not going to come to the assistance of South Korea and Japan. That's the job of the United States. Now, there's a problem. The United States did just recently integrate South Korea into its nuclear war fighting plan. So we now, in addition to the wonderful reduction of the threshold of use of nuclear weapons in Europe, we're reducing the threshold of nuclear weapons in the Pacific too. It's as if we want to die. But that's it. No, this NATO expansion in the Pacific exists in the minds of really demented NATO and Western people who are desperate for help from elsewhere because Europe can't do it. I just told you the European defense industry capacity can't meet Ukraine's needs. So NATO desperately needs South Korea to start shipping stuff to Ukraine. And that's going to create a geopolitical problem in and of itself. So, South Korea is a little mad right now because, Russia now is helping build up North Korean capabilities, and NATO's mad because North Korea is theoretically at least sending weapons and ammunition to Russia to use in the Ukraine conflict. And so the idea is to offset that by getting South Korea involved, but that's going to complicate South Korea's life. But that's the thing about NATO. NATO solves nothing. All NATO does is create problems. That's it. There is no NATO solution. Anytime NATO touches something, it gets infected with a cancer that rots it, destroys it. NATO just touched South Korea. NATO just touched Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. It's not going to help them. It's going to hasten their demise unless they cleanse themselves of this NATO rot.
When you look at the China's army in Belarus doing some exercises right now, Russia and China doing a joint military exercise in the South China Sea, and do you think that NATO and specifically the United States understands that if something happens in Taiwan, that would be literally the end of the planet, because Taiwan is not capable of carrying out any sort of conventional war against China?
No, Taiwan can't, neither can the United States. Neither can not can the IP4. South Korea can't. Japan can't. Australia definitely can't. New Zealand. Why are we talking about New Zealand? This is political, purely political. It's the establishment having committed down a path using models that are, premised on capabilities that may have once existed but that no longer exist. We haven't changed our models of behavior. Does the United States realize it? Again, as long as the United States is governed by an establishment that that requires, again, Dwight D. Eisenhower warned about this. His warning has come to life. His farewell address in 1961 about the military-industrial complex, the military-industrial congressional complex, the unhealthy relationship between a militarized American economy and the money that comes from Congress that has to sustain that. When you allow your economy to be defined by this militarization and this relationship between defense industry and the Congress, and the legislature, it means that this is the engine that now defines the American economy, the American being. And if it's going to be militarized, that means you need a war. You need conflict to keep that engine running. That's the fuel. And so the entire premise of the United States since the end of the Second World War is perpetual conflict. We're not promoting peace. When was the last time we promoted peace? We don't promote peace. We promote outcomes. And if the outcomes can be achieved in a nonviolent manner, so great. But at least while we're trying to achieve it in a nonviolent manner, it's always done with the threat of potential violence, which requires this militarized system in place. And we promote war. There's not a single place in the world where the United States promotes peace. Middle East, it's all about war. Persian Gulf, it's all about war. Look what we're doing in the Pacific. It's all about war. Europe, all about war. Everything we do is about war. It's defined by conflict, defined by war. Look at China, on the other hand. Belts and roads. You may disagree with it. Many people do. It's the exact opposite of war. It's about development. It's about going in there and building infrastructure to create economic relations that aren't predicated upon China insisting that you buy its weapons or that you go to war against your neighbor or anything. It's all about just business. That's how the Chinese operate. Look at what Russia's doing with BRICS and all this. This transition to multilateralism isn't about the imposition of a Russian militarized hegemony on the world. It's about Russia being part of a system that puts more emphasis on economic relationships than it does on military. That's the direction that the whole world is going, except for the United States and its allies, who are all caught up in this military-industrial congressional complex. And this is the ultimate perversion of America, because we don't stand for freedom. We don't stand for liberty. We don't stand for democracy. We stand for war. We stand for death. We stand for destruction. We aren't the solution. We are the problem. We are literally the problem. And as long as we continue to have an establishment in place in Washington, D.C., whether you call it the deep state or you call it the interagency or whatever name, the blob, as long as it's there empowered by a duopoly, which means it doesn't matter who is in charge, Democrat or Republic, we continue to promote the military industrial Dwight D. Eisenhower warned about this. It's the death of the American democratic experiment. And it's worked. It's over. We don't have democracy because all we do is vote for people that keep the same system in place, promoting conflict. Maybe, again, we come back to MAGA. Maybe MAGA could do it. Because I have to tell you, any system that says America first and means it, meaning not America first, we're going to kick your ass, but America first, we're going to take care of America first. Any system that says we're not the world's policeman, that's a good system. That's a great system because you're beginning to break this model of conflict that feeds the United States of America. We have to get free of that. And we don't do it by voting for Biden. We don't do it by voting for, mainstream Republican candidates. We only do it by voting for people that say that's a system we no longer support. But the United States today is the greatest threat to international peace and security in the world today. I can guarantee you this, because I've talked to them. The Iranians are not unreasonable people. They are not. They want to live their lives, but they're not looking for global hegemony. They're looking for peaceful coexistence. And if the United States put as much emphasis on diplomacy as we do on the military, we could resolve every single problem with Iran peacefully, every single problem. China is not an irresponsible nation. It's a nation governed by rational people. We have problems with China. One of the reasons is that we are engaged in an economic competition with China, where their economic motive is belts and roads, and our economic motive is sustainment of a militarized system that requires conflict. So to compete with China effectively, we need conflict. Enter Taiwan. That's the whole thing about Taiwan. Let's stop talking about democracy and all that stuff. Taiwan exists in the American geopolitical thinking only as a generator of conflict to justify the growth of the American economy into the Pacific. In order to compete with China in the Pacific, we need to have conflict with China. That's what the IP4 is all about. That's what NATO expansion is all about. That's what the South China Sea is all about. We could resolve the South China Sea problems today peacefully, equitably, in a manner that made everybody there live in peace and harmony. But we can't do that because our system can't be sustained with peace. That's the problem. American system cannot be sustained with peace. Peace is the enemy of America. That's the problem, man. That's what the big problem is. We could solve the problems with China diplomatically. We could solve that. Damn, the easiest problem in the world today to solve is Russia. It is literally the easiest problem in the world today to solve. Except we have to have conflict. So we created conflict in Ukraine. Russia did not create the Ukraine conflict. We did, because we need that to justify the continuation of NATO, which is a military alliance predicated upon, economic or infrastructures, the European Union, the G7. It's all warmongering, baby. It only exists for one thing: to promote conflict, to promote war. Europe is not postured to live in peace and harmony with Russia. It's postured to be an extension of the American enterprise, which can only exist if there's conflict. I mean, it disgusts me as an American to talk about this. Look at the Middle East. For God's sake, we could solve this thing tomorrow. We could solve this thing tomorrow. It would require us to tell the Israelis, because the Israelis are literally an extension of the American military machine. Israel is a projection of American hegemony into the Middle East. Zionism is an extension of this disease that I talked about with the American. Israel can only exist if it dominates militarily. That's the only way it can exist. So we would have to have a fundamental discussion about Israel. We can't have a fundamental discussion about Israel unless we're willing to have a fundamental discussion about ourselves. Physician, heal thyself. So that's one of the problems, is America can never be expected to solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem because Israel is us. And to have Israel fundamentally change the way it operates requires us to likewise be willing to fundamentally change the way we operate. We have to be willing to divorce ourselves from this Zionist enterprise, which is simply an extension of America's hegemony, the way America controls and manipulates. But if we actually wanted peace where Jews could live in a Palestinian state, where they could practice their religion without fear, where they could thrive economically, we would have to accept that Zionism is the problem, not the solution. We could do this through leadership. We're big enough and strong enough to do this, but we're not going to, because it's against who we are. Dwight D. Eisenhower warned us about this. And the military-industrial congressional complex has manifested itself, has metastasized in different ways. And one of the ways it's metastasized is the American-Israeli relationship today. It is a warmongering relationship that can only exist by promoting death and destruction, the oppression of people using military force on the part of Israel. That's it. That's what the Palestinian conflict is. Every conflict in the world is defined by America's need for that conflict. America could be the greatest peacemaker out there, should be the greatest peacemaker. But we're not wired to do that. We're not wired to do that. So long as the establishment that currently exists is in place. Go to Georgetown University. I'm picking on Georgetown now because my daughter just graduated, so they can no longer hold anything over her head. Georgetown is where we train the next generation of American Forest Service professionals. They tell you when you come in, they show photographs of great moments in history. And they show the people gathered, and they say, you could be that person in the room. You could be that one making the life and death decisions of the world. First of all, that's sort of narcissistic, the idea that, wow, America's got to lead by front. We are the ones, but that's okay. I mean, hell, why not? But the concept is that you're in that room because you're the best. You're in that room because you know more, because you have studied, because you have articulated visions that could be manifested in policy. This requires, therefore, a Georgetown student to have an open mind. And Georgetown claims, you read all their literature about an open mind, an open mind, open mind, open mind, open mind, all that free debate. We never suppress anything. We encourage this, that, and the other thing. My daughter majored in South Caucasian studies. That's the Caucasus region. Basically, she focused on Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. But no region operates in a vacuum. And when you study South Caucasian studies, you have to study North Caucasian issues. Oh, let's see, what's a nation in North Caucasia? Chechnya. And then there's the whole Russian thing has, because Chechnya is part of the Russian Federation. So last December, I took my daughter to Russia with me. I was going on a trip. I wanted to expose her to Russia, show her the Russian Federation, the Russian people, Russian culture, and we had an opportunity to go to Chechnya. And while we're in Chechnya, we had an opportunity to meet some very important people. The current prime minister of Chechnya is a guy whose nickname is Lord. Mahmoud Daudov, I think his name is. I apologize, Mahmoud, if I mispronounced it. Lord is how I know you, and that's how I'll refer to you. Cool guy. People say, how could you say cool guy? Been cool to me, nice guy. I know his reputation. I know his background. I also know the history of Chechnya that requires people of that character to have existed. And once they existed and they prevailed, defeated the forces who are trying to destroy Chechnya, they have risen to the apex of the pyramid. He's now prime minister. She got to meet him, talk with him. Adam Delikanov, senior member of the Chechen parliament, the man who led Chechen forces during the Battle of Mariupol, historic figure. We got to have a lengthy dinner with him in his home, where we had very in-depth conversations about a variety of issues. Abdi Aladanov, he's the Chechen commander general. He's now in the Russian Ministry of Defense, just graduated from the General Staff Academy, considered to be one of the major up and coming people. Got to meet him. Got to meet Ramzan Kadyrov, the head of the Chechen Republic. Invited into his personal residence where we had lunch, and we had a lengthy conversation. none of this means that my daughter rolled over and became a stooge of the Russians or the Chechens. What it means is that a student, a graduate level student at Georgetown, got to go to Russia. She got, she got to meet a whole bunch of really cool people and see cool things. And she was exposed to a whole bunch. When she arrived back in Georgetown, they ostracized her. They attacked her cruelly. I'm talking about the most cruel things in the world. This institution that's supposed to be about open-minded learning. What should have happened is the dean of Georgetown should have said, "You did what? You went where? You went to Russia? You went to Chechnya? You met Rams? Have a seat, young lady. I don't want to put you on the spot because I know you got your studies going, but I would love you to talk to the faculty about this, about your experiences, what you saw. And I'd like to put together a special seminar where we could bring as many of the students in here to talk to you and ask questions. You don't mind if they ask questions. I mean, it could be probing questions, but there are a lot of people that may not agree, with Russia and Chechnya. But my God, you went and talked. Oh, holy cow, what a unique, empowering opportunity for us to know things about Russia and Chechnya, because we're Georgetown and we're trying to create the best possible people for the future of American diplomacy. We need to know these things. I didn't do that. They shut her down because they don't care, because they have their preconceived ideas about how the world's supposed to work. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the establishment. If you're an American citizen or you're a global citizen and you're hoping for America to do the right thing, I just told you how Georgetown University will never do the right thing so long as it's controlled by the establishment. And that holds true with all the think tanks out there, because they're only populated by people that come from the establishment. That's what happens when you allow the establishment to pick the candidates for the duopoly. The establishment will never cure itself. The establishment only exists for the establishment. And until we break free of that, we're prisoners. We are literal prisoners to a system. And I come down to the most harshest indictment I can put to America, a system that can only exist by promoting the destruction of the world we live in. I know we did it last time, but I just want to remind your audience of the book covering Ukraine. It's more important today than it has ever been. There's growing talk about how this conflict is going to be wound up, et cetera.
Show the book, Scott. Show the book. Yeah, just
in Ukraine.
Yeah.
But there was a recommendation written. Let me see. Covering Ukraine is a journey into the heart of a conflict that has reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the 21st century. This riveting account delves beyond headlines and statistics, offering a poignant exploration of the human experiences and strategic maneuvers that define the ongoing struggle. An essential read for anyone seeking to understand the complexities and the stake of this pivotal global crisis. You wrote that. Yeah. So thank you for that. And again, the book was written because it was time to write a book like this. And current events only underscores how important this book is to empowering people to better understand the issues that are at play when we talk about how to resolve the conflict in Ukraine. So thanks for giving me an opportunity to pitch the books. Thanks for supporting the book, and we'll see you next time.
It's my pleasure. I'm gonna put the link in the description of this video. Everybody can access the link.